about materialism, the idea that our mental life emerges from our psychical brain. If you listen closely, if you're thinking about this, I hope you acknowledge it, that this is odd and unnatural wave. I don't expect you to believe, at least not at first. And in fact, for the most part, people are far more attracted to the doctrine called dualism. Dualism is an idea that's been found in just about every religion and every philosophy. It's made explicit in Plato, for instance. But I think the most helpful and intellectually different of dualism, that philosopher René Descartes. Descartes believed the animals were material things. He thought that the doctrine of materialism was correct about non-human animals, but humans are different. Descartes agreed. The humans, their duality, the possible of two sorts of things, they are composable of two sorts of things. They are in part material, but they are also in part spiritual, mental, psychological. In some way, that does reduce to the materialism. He made two arguments for this, and they are both reasonably good arguments, at least quite persuaded at his time, and have persuaded many people and continued to persuade many people. The first argument, material nature is capable of doing things that no machine, no material unit ever could. So it might strike you to hear this, but Descartes in the 17th century was familiar with robots. He knew the French royal gardens. This is like a 17th century Disneyland or Euro Disney, which had robots that read, then you approach them of then you step of certain stone. For instance, you might approach Diana and then Neptune would jump out from the bushes holding a trident. This was done not of electricity but with water, so Descartes knew about these robots, and Descartes asked, well, maybe there are such things, maybe they are just machines reporting to the environment. And he said that we can't be. He said maybe animals, non-human animals can be, but human behavior is far more complicated and varied and subtle to explain it in such simple ways. They return to the point later on the course then. They talk about Noam Chomsky, and Noam Chomsky created of behaviorists, which agreed that basic human responding in a reality wave the environment stimulus. Descartes along with Chomsky said they can't be. Our behaviors for too complicated for that, so there can't be machine. His second argument is probably better now, and it's based on intuition, and his claim was we don't feel as bodies. So, to put it more technically, he applied it that was called of made full of doubt. He asked the question, what do they know for sure and what can be questions? So, for instance, you might believe you were born in such and so place. You could be wrong, you could be deceived. You might believe that yes, if thousands of millions of years old. But maybe the years was created 100 years ago, and all the memories that your grandparents have of the past, they're just manufacture. You might believe, said Descartes, that you live in a world of things, that you sitting in a chair of this or falling front of there a computer near your hands. But Descartes observed that we often believe such things than we are in dreams, but rarely mistaken. He observed that people who are mentally ill or exaggerate in some ways may have such belief, but don't be mistaken. So you could be wrong that the physical world around you. If you could be wrong that there is a body that you have. This is incident concert, of course, but it's best article in movie, The Matrix, which maintains that things are running around a physical world, but actually, with the lucky explosion of our heroes like Neo and Trinity, they actually just pledged into some sort of system. Another version of this is that the brain in what? If you their brain, just the brain sitting in what? With electrical wires stimulating you experience you couldn't help. Maybe you're such things. Modern day philosophers, for instance, will agree that the excellent chance that we are simulations, the computer simulations. So Descartes and people following Descartes said, there's a lot of we can't be sure of. They think that the shimmering most confidence about in real world can't be shaken. But Descartes said, there is a thing you can't double. You can't double your own consciousness. You can't double your own existence. The famous line, I think, therefore I am. And building out this intuition, building from the fact you can't double that you have a body, but you can double that you have a mind. Descartes wrote, I knew that I was a substance, the whole essence of nature, of which is to think, and that for its extension there is no need of any place, no does dependent it material things. That is to say, the soul, by which I am that I, is entirely distinct from body. So that's a philosophical case for dualism. But as I said, dualism is also emergent out of common sense. Think about how you describe your body. You describe your body if you possess it, my arms, my hair, my body, my brains, as if it's something separate from you that you have, of consider your intuition about person identity. So typical as people age, they are consistent following their body. So I get 10 years older, my mind 10 years older, my brain is 10 years older. It's an connect together. But we easily accept and lose infection that people can hope from one body to another. There are many comedies that involve body switching, body swamps. There are movies that involve somebody going to sleep one morning as one person and waking up as another. They understand they're fiction, they aren't real, but they make sense to us. There's two entity relational to this. We don't walk out the theory and say, I'm totally confused, that happened there. Rather, at least with our innate conception of the self, the accept that leads to the possibility that you can hope from one body to another. None of this is limited to modern-day movies. The most famous short story of history by Franz Kafka begins with this sentence. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. Metamorphosis involves that transformation, and long before that in Ulysses the characters are transformed. Some of the characters are transformed by an evil beast into pigs. It's none of you took to people and turned them into pigs rather, it much horse. They put them in the body of pigs. As the passage goes, they had to head and voice and bristles and body of swine, but their minds remained untrained as before. So their painting, their weeping. All conception that bodies as cells are separate allows us to accept idea you had many people inhabit one body. This is how many people think about multiple personality disorders. Something we'll get to quite later of the course. It also at the root a wave that many people, both religion and non-religion, hold, which is the idea of demonic possessions. Your body can be taken over by something else. Another manifestation of dualism is you could believe of in intelligence begins without bodies. If mind and body are separate as races, the possible you could have one without the other. Plainly, you got to have bodies without minds. That of course is. But the argument cuts, you could also have minds without bodies. This is, for instance, for many people think about gods or angels. These are the immaterial beings that can think, that can observe, that can act, but they don't have physical bodies in the same sense that we do. Finally, and maybe most important for people, the idea that of dualism, the idea you are not of physical bodies, raises that must be for many indescribable, appalling confusions with that can you service the destructions of the body? In fact, if you most people, religious and non-religious, that will happen after your body is destroyed. The answer is not well, I am dead then, that's it. It's the end of things, but rather the build is that you can live on. Maybe you end up in some spirit world. Maybe you the ascend to heaven. If you're unlucky, maybe will descend to hell. Maybe you occupy some other body as an reincarnation. But the idea is that the destruction of your body need not be the destruction of you because you are not your body. All of these beliefs, the beliefs about personal identity, the beliefs about life after this, about the existence of supernatural beings, about God, all rest at least to some extent on a dualism perspective. So, materialism, which say dualism is just playing wrong, is in outexpression waves and should be treated as such. You shouldn't just shoot and write it down. You should grab with it. You should worry about it. You should either the grappling accident or fight against it. So, why are modern-day philosophics and nature scientists so confident that dualism is mistaken? Well, there are wave problems with it. One is that it simply doesn't help us explain certain things that need to be explained. Appealing to an immaterial world, to an immaterial soul seems to dodge certain questions that really do deserve an answer. So throws out with course they're asking questions like how do the language that do we find sexually attractive, how does memory work? There are questions about ourselves, our own minds. To say, oh, it all happens some immaterial levels as hopeless, then it comes to answering them. The second concern is that at the time, Descartes was correct to infer from the limitation of material things, physical things, that they probably are not physical things. But being now we have a much better understanding that physical things can do with make it entirely possible for many of us that we are set things. So I'm thinking, for instance, of computers and robots. For Descartes, the idea that a physical things can do something as complicated as play a game of chess would seem ludicrous. But now, of course, we know the physical things, and if you looking at the computer, I looking outside the physical things, can do exactly that. Can understand language, they could recognize objects, they could store things in memory, they can make inference and so on. Now, for some of these things, they don't end anywhere near as well as people do. So, then we talk about language development. For instance, we see that a 2-year-old child using and understands language better than any computers around. So, we need to bear that in mind. But still, it's no longer not to say that physical things can do all of the right and psychological diverse and psychological complicated things that people do, which means that we have to take seriously the claim that there are in fact such physical things. The final consideration is that there are terminations evidence that their brains in fact the roots of mental life. So, but aside all that psychological abstract arguments, that just tons of direct evidence. To some extent, that direct evidence has always been there. You don't have to be born in the 30s of centuries to appreciate that getting hit in the head could affect your consciousness and your memories. to abrogate that diseases like strepsin can lead to description of consciousness. Alzheimer can rob of your rationalization. That coffee and alcohol can inflame in the position. In just it's so evidence in everyday life that if physical events that affect the brain can affect ourselves, suggesting that at the very least our mental life is emulated, connecting to the brain. In recent years, something else has happened, which is web-developed technologies that allow us to look directly into the brain, look at the brain activation, and inform patterns of the brain activation that people are thinking. So, very gradually you can put somebody into a scanner and fMRI scanner, and you could tell whether of not thinking about language or music or sex. The technology is increasing. There's such a point this is not unpleasant that for some of by the time you listen to this, they can put sleeping person under fMRI scanner and know from neural patterns of neural firings. Now that they're dreaming. All of this, I think it's very difficult to keep this in mind and hold on to the wave of dualism. I think materialism, however unconformable, however unpalatable, is a wave that the sense for sent up to adopt.